It was in the heart of South Africa, in a protected reserve where wild nature still reigned supreme. The day began calmly, but by noon the sky had darkened. Storm clouds hung low, the wind swirled dust, and even the birds disappeared from view. The animals began to seek shelter. A group of lions was walking along one of the rocky ridges. Among them was a young male, just over a year old. He was not yet the king of the savannah, but he already stood out. Strong, curious, a little stubborn. Climbing up the slope, he moved slightly away from the pack. The wind blew sand into his face, and the grass under his feet slid across the wet rock. And in an instant, everything changed. The rock under his paw shifted. There was a dull thud, and the lion fell off the edge of the cliff, stopping halfway down. He miraculously caught the edge of the rock with his front paws. His claws scraped against the ledge. His body hung heavily in the air, his hind paws dangling helplessly in the void. He was frightened, so much so that he didn't even let out a full roar. Only a hoarse, disjointed sound, like a plea, as if he were calling for help. A few hundred meters away was a ranger. His name was Thomas Baker, and it was his last day on patrol before going on vacation. He was about to return to base when he heard that strange sound. A storm was rumbling, but there was something unnatural about the sound, a fear unlike the usual predatory cry. He turned off the trail and headed towards the cliff. When he emerged from behind an acacia bush, he saw it. A young lion was hanging over the precipice. Dirt was falling beneath him. The animal's eyes met his, and Thomas, a man trained not to interfere, not to make direct contact, suddenly threw his rifle to the ground and rushed to the edge. He knew that one wrong step and he would fall himself. But he couldn't stop. Thomas approached the edge, trying not to look down. Below him was a gaping abyss. Lev was hanging just a few meters away, his grip weakening, his breathing ragged. He was no longer struggling, but simply clinging on, as if his instincts still refused to give up. The rock beneath the ranger's feet was unstable. The ground crumbled, and each step he took echoed with a dull crack. But he knew that if he didn't act now, there would be no other chance. He lay down on his stomach, pressing himself against the rock, and slowly began to crawl forward, holding in one hand the strong rope he carried with him for emergencies. He reached the edge, leaned over, and looked down. Their eyes met again. There was no rage in the lion's eyes, only panic and trust. This is rare in a predator. It felt as if the beast understood that he was not an enemy. Thomas tied the end of the rope to the nearest root, wrapped the free loop around himself, and lying down, reached down. His fingers slipped on the wet fur. At that moment, the lion stirred, not out of fear, but as if in response. He did not resist. He just waited. Thomas managed to grab the animal's neck and pull its front paws to the edge. It was incredibly difficult. The lion's body was heavy and wet, and his grip on the rock was weak. But inch by inch, he pulled it up onto the dry part of the plateau. When it was all over, and the lion was lying next to him, breathing heavily, Thomas leaned back, fell on his back, and spread his arms. The storm was receding, and he still couldn't believe that he had just saved 2 lives on the edge, the lion's and his own. Thomas lay on his back, trying to catch his breath. His heart was pounding in his ears, his fingers trembling with tension. Nearby, on a wet rock, a young lion stretched out. He too was motionless, as if he had become so exhausted that even his instincts had frozen. The rain was subsiding. A pale light peeked through the clouds on the horizon. The savannah was slowly coming back to life, but on this cliff, high above, silence reigned. Thomas cautiously got up on his knees. He expected the lion to be frightened, to get up and run away, but it just raised its head and looked at him, long, calmly, without growling, without aggression, with some kind of deep, primitive trust. Then the lion slowly got up on its paws, shook its wet mane, and slowly walked towards the savannah. But before disappearing into the tall grass, it turned around. One last look, brief, precise. as if it really understood that it had been saved, and as if it was saying thank you. A month passed. Thomas had long since returned to his normal life in the reserve. The rescue of the lion remained in his memory as a powerful but private episode. He didn't really tell anyone about it. He just did his job. He never saw the lion again. One morning, he went out to the field near the southern border of the park to check for poachers' tracks. Everything was going as usual. Suddenly, he heard an alarming bark. It was his service dog, Rico, who had sensed something. Thomas quickened his pace. In an open clearing, he saw the lion, the very same one. He recognized it immediately by the scar on its front paw. But the lion was not alone. Next to it were two lion cubs, very small. The lion stood between them and the man, not growling, not threatening, just watching. And then Thomas realized this was not just a beast he had once saved. This was a father who had brought his children to show them someone he trusted. The silent encounter lasted only a couple of minutes. Then the lion slowly turned and disappeared into the tall grass, and the cubs followed him, looking back at the man with curiosity. After that encounter, Thomas couldn't get over it for a long time. He saw it as something more than just a coincidence. That lion didn't just remember him, it trusted him again, not out of fear, but of its own free will, bringing its offspring with it. Since then, Thomas has begun to view his work differently. He no longer considered himself merely a border guard. He became a defender of trust between humans and wildlife. He began keeping a diary of his observations, photographing animals, and creating an archive in which he recorded every interaction, especially those that were not about fear, but about mutual respect. One day, he wrote a simple sentence in his notebook: "If a lion can remember a human, then we are not so different after all." And every day, he continued to go out into the savannah. Maybe he would never see that lion again. Or maybe one day he would see a shadow in the grass and a pair of attentive eyes again. With each new dawn, Thomas understood more and more that his role in this world was not simply to guard the boundaries of the reserve. He witnessed how trust between humans and wildlife was possible, and that trust changed lives. He continued to go out into the savannah, observing, recording, cherishing every moment. Sometimes he noticed the lion's tracks, that same scar on its paw, and his heart began to beat faster. Sometimes it seemed as if the lion was still nearby, guarding this piece of land like an invisible guardian. And Thomas was no longer afraid to be close to wildlife, because now he knew true strength lies in understanding and mutual respect.